The people who judge the fastest are often the ones who know the least. Naomi Carter moved quietly through the Park estate as late afternoon sunlight spilled through towering glass windows and stretched across the polished marble floors like liquid gold. The mansion looked flawless from every angle. Fresh white roses stood in crystal vases. Silver place settings reflected the warm light. The scent of a carefully prepared dinner drifted through the halls. Everything had been arranged for Adrian Park's return after nearly 3 weeks away. Most employees were simply preparing for their employer to come home. Naomi had a different reason for caring. Hidden inside a small velvet box tucked safely inside a kitchen drawer was a gift nobody knew existed. She had spent months saving for it. Every extra dollar from careful budgeting, every small sacrifice, every decision to put someone else before herself. The gift was not extravagant. It was meaningful. Earlier that morning, she had polished the antique watch one final time before placing it back inside the box. Her fingers had lingered on the velvet for only a second before she closed the lid. Tomorrow marked an important day, one that most people had forgotten. Naomi had not. She passed through the dining room carrying fresh flowers and paused beside a framed photograph resting on a side table. Adrian stood beside his late father in the picture. Both were smiling. Naomi looked at the photograph for a moment before continuing her work. She remembered stories the older staff had shared over the past year. She remembered dates, memories, details that seemed unimportant to everyone else. To her, they mattered. Kindness was often found in remembering what others overlooked. Around her, the household moved with quiet efficiency. The chef reviewed final preparations. The house manager checked schedules. Security personnel confirmed arrival times. Everything seemed calm. Yet beneath that calm, a secret waited inside a velvet box. Naomi smiled softly as she adjusted a centerpiece in the formal dining room. She imagined Adrian discovering the gift and understanding why she had chosen it. Not because she expected praise. Not because she wanted recognition. Simply because gratitude deserved expression. Outside, the distant sound of a vehicle entering the driveway interrupted the peaceful rhythm of the afternoon. Naomi glanced through the window and immediately straightened her posture. She assumed Adrian had arrived early. Instead, a luxury sedan stopped beneath the covered entrance and a different figure stepped out. Evelyn Park, Adrian's mother, elegant, impeccably dressed, confident in a way that caused conversations to stop the moment she entered a room. Employees quietly greeted her as she crossed the foyer. Naomi approached respectfully. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Park." Evelyn looked at her for several seconds before offering a small smile. "You're Naomi." It sounded more like an observation than a greeting. "Yes, ma'am." Evelyn slowly looked around the mansion. Her eyes returned to Naomi. "I have heard quite a bit about you." Naomi smiled politely. "I hope all good things." Evelyn's expression barely changed. "That depends on who is telling the story." The words were delivered gently, yet something about them felt colder than the air-conditioned marble halls. As Evelyn continued walking through the estate, her gaze lingered on Naomi longer than necessary. And standing beneath the golden light of the approaching evening, Naomi felt the first shadow of a misunderstanding beginning to take shape. For the next hour, Naomi focused on her work and tried to ignore the uneasy feeling Evelyn's words had left behind. She refreshed floral arrangements, reviewed the dining room one final time, and returned to the kitchen where dinner preparations continued beneath warm lights and polished copper fixtures. Normally, the familiar rhythm of responsibility helped her relax. Today, it did not. Everywhere she went, she sensed Evelyn watching. The older woman moved through the estate with quiet confidence, observing every room and every employee with careful attention. Conversations became shorter whenever she appeared. Smiles faded. The atmosphere that had felt welcoming earlier slowly transformed into something far more uncomfortable. Shortly after 6 o'clock, Naomi stepped into the kitchen and opened the drawer containing the velvet box. She only wanted to make certain everything remained exactly as she had left it. The antique watch rested safely inside. A small smile touched her face before she gently closed the drawer. When she turned around, she nearly stopped breathing. Evelyn stood near the doorway. Neither woman spoke at first. The only sound came from a kettle softly humming on the stove. Evelyn's eyes moved briefly toward the drawer before returning to Naomi. "You seem very invested in Adrian's return," she said. Naomi folded a kitchen towel and placed it neatly beside the counter. "Everyone is preparing for him to come home." Evelyn tilted her head slightly. "Everyone." The single word carried more meaning than the question itself. Naomi maintained her composure. "Mr. Park treats people well. The staff respects him." Evelyn slowly walked farther into the room. "Respect is important." She paused. "Sometimes people mistake other things for respect." Naomi understood the implication immediately, yet she refused to react. She had spent too much of her life learning the value of silence when assumptions had already been made. Evelyn continued examining the kitchen as if searching for something hidden beneath the surface. Her gaze eventually settled on a small receipt partially visible beneath a notepad near the coffee station. Before Naomi could move, Evelyn picked it up. The room suddenly felt colder. Naomi recognized the paper immediately. It was the receipt from the antique store. Evelyn read it slowly. Her eyes lingered on the purchase amount. As she looked back at Naomi, "You bought something expensive." Naomi remained calm. "It is personal." Evelyn folded the receipt carefully. Personal things usually stay personal when they belong to the right person. The statement landed harder than Naomi expected. Around them, several employees quietly focused on their tasks while pretending not to hear. Nobody wanted to become part of the conversation. Evelyn glanced once more toward the drawer. The suspicion in her eyes was no longer subtle. It had become certainty. Whatever explanation Naomi might have offered no longer seemed capable of changing. The story Evelyn had already written in her mind. The older woman placed the receipt on the counter and stepped closer. "I think there is something in this house that deserves an explanation." Naomi looked at the drawer and then back at Evelyn. Deep inside, she felt the first warning that a secret meant to bring comfort was about to become the center of a painful misunderstanding. The kitchen seemed smaller after Evelyn's final words settled into the silence. Naomi looked at the drawer and immediately understood what was about to happen. The antique watch had never been intended to create attention. It had been chosen to honor a memory. Yet standing here now, it felt as though every good intention had somehow become suspicious. Evelyn waited. Naomi remained calm. "It is a private matter," she said carefully. Evelyn's expression barely changed. Private matters usually belong to the people involved. The response carried a sharpness hidden beneath perfect manners. Several employees moved quietly around the kitchen, though nobody truly stopped listening. Naomi knew they could feel the tension. She simply wished they did not have to witness it. Evelyn took another step toward the drawer. "What exactly did you purchase?" Naomi looked down briefly before meeting her eyes again. "I would prefer not to discuss it." That answer seemed to confirm every suspicion Evelyn already carried. The older woman folded her arms. "You are refusing to explain something connected to my son." Naomi felt a knot forming in her stomach. "It is not what you think." "Then help me understand." For a moment, Naomi considered telling the truth. She could explain the anniversary. She could explain Adrian's father. She could explain why she had spent months preparing a gift that carried more sentiment than value. But if she revealed everything now, the surprise would disappear forever. So she remained silent. Evelyn interpreted that silence differently. Her eyes drifted toward the drawer once more. Then, before Naomi could stop her, she opened it. The velvet box sat inside, beneath the warm kitchen lights. Several employees froze where they stood. Naomi felt embarrassment wash over her. Something deeply personal was about to become public. Evelyn lifted the box and examined it. Her expression remained unreadable. Slowly, she opened the lid. The antique watch rested inside, polished and elegant. It immediately looked expensive enough to raise questions. The room seemed to stop breathing. Evelyn stared at it for several seconds before looking back at Naomi. "This is quite a gift." Naomi kept her voice steady. "It was never meant to be seen before the right moment." Evelyn closed the box. For Adrian, Naomi hesitated. There was little point denying it now. Yes. The answer changed everything. Several employees exchanged uncomfortable glances. Evelyn's posture stiffened. And what made you believe this was appropriate? Naomi felt every eye in the room settle upon her. Not because she had done something wrong, because someone else had already decided she had. I wanted to express gratitude, she said quietly. Evelyn gave a faint smile that carried no warmth. Gratitude. She repeated the word slowly. That is an interesting choice. Naomi understood exactly what was being implied, yet she refused to defend herself with anger. Mr. Park has always treated people with kindness. Evelyn's gaze sharpened immediately. Kindness can be misunderstood. The words landed heavily across the room. Naomi felt the truth of the moment settle over her. This conversation was no longer about a watch. It was no longer about a gift. It was about assumptions, about status, about someone deciding her intentions without ever asking who she truly was. And standing beneath the warm kitchen lights, Naomi realized that the secret she had protected for months had just become the center of a misunderstanding she might not be able to escape. The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument. The antique watch remained in Evelyn's hands while the employees around them pretended to focus on their work. Nobody wanted to be part of the conversation, yet nobody could escape it either. Naomi stood quietly beside the kitchen island. Her posture remained calm, but inside she felt the growing weight of being misunderstood. Evelyn slowly placed the velvet box on the counter. "I've spent my entire life around people who wanted something from my family," she said. Her voice remained controlled and elegant. "I learned long ago that intentions are not always what they appear to be." Naomi lowered her eyes briefly. Not out of guilt, out of disappointment. She had hoped kindness would speak for itself. Instead, it had become the source of suspicion. "You are mistaken about me," she said softly. Evelyn folded her arms. "Then perhaps you should explain why a household employee is purchasing expensive gifts for my son." Naomi felt every person in the kitchen listening. The embarrassment was not loud. It was quiet. That somehow made it worse. "Some things are personal," she replied. Evelyn shook her head. "Not when they involve Adrian." The older woman looked around the room before returning her attention to Naomi. People should understand their position. Several employees shifted uncomfortably. The statement was directed at one person, but everyone felt the sharpness behind it. Naomi remained silent. She knew no explanation would matter now. Evelyn had already decided what the story was. Facts would not change it. Not today. The realization settled over her like a cold rain. Nearly a year. That was how long she had worked in this home. Early mornings, long evenings, holidays spent helping others celebrate. She had given her best because she genuinely cared. Yet in this moment, none of it seemed visible. Only assumptions remained. Evelyn glanced at the velvet box once more. Kindness from people in Adrian's position often creates confusion. Naomi finally looked directly at her. Kindness did not create this situation. The words were respectful, but firm. For the first time, Evelyn seemed surprised. Naomi continued. Assumptions did. The kitchen fell completely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Evelyn's expression hardened slightly. "Be careful." Naomi nodded once. "I am." Then something inside her became clear. The conversation would not improve. Staying would only create more humiliation. Respect could not survive where trust no longer existed. Without another word, Naomi reached up and untied her apron. The simple action immediately captured everyone's attention. She folded the apron carefully and placed it on the marble counter beside the velvet box. Then she removed her employee badge. The small plastic card suddenly seemed heavier than it had ever felt before. She placed it beside the apron. A few employees stared in disbelief. Evelyn's eyes widened slightly. "What are you doing?" Naomi looked at her calmly. "Leaving." The answer was simple, honest, final. She picked up her purse and the velvet box. Then she paused. After a moment of thought, she gently placed the velvet box back onto the counter. The gift had never been about her. It belonged where it had always belonged. Naomi offered a small smile to the employees who had shown her kindness throughout the past year. No speeches. No acquiescence. No anger. Then she turned toward the hallway leading to the staff quarters. Behind her remained a perfectly prepared dinner, carefully arranged flowers, and a house that suddenly no longer felt like home. Ahead of her waited uncertainty. Yet as she walked away, one thing remained untouched. She was leaving the estate behind, but she refused to leave her dignity behind with it. Rain began falling shortly after Naomi left the estate. It was not a storm, only a steady curtain of silver that softened the city lights and turned the pavement into shimmering reflections. Carrying a small overnight bag, she walked beyond the estate gates without looking back. Behind her, the mansion remained beautifully illuminated against the darkening evening sky. From a distance, everything appeared unchanged. The flowers were still arranged. Dinner remained prepared. Every detail she had spent the day perfecting was exactly where she had left it. Yet something important had quietly disappeared from inside the house. Back at the estate, an unusual silence settled over the staff. Employees completed their duties with far less conversation than usual. The kitchen felt larger and somehow emptier. Even Evelyn found herself wandering through rooms that suddenly seemed unfamiliar. Everywhere she looked, she noticed traces of Naomi's care. A vase positioned perfectly near a window. Fresh linens folded with precision. Small details nobody had paid attention to until they were forced to notice the person who created them. Hours passed. Outside, the rain continued to fall. Then, shortly after 9 o'clock, headlights appeared at the end of the long driveway. Security personnel straightened immediately. Staff members exchanged nervous glances. Adrian had finally returned home. A black luxury vehicle rolled beneath the covered entrance and came to a smooth stop. Moments later, Adrian stepped out wearing a dark tailored suit beneath a long coat. A faint glimpse of the tattoo near his collar appeared as he adjusted his tie. Despite weeks of travel, he carried himself with the same calm confidence that always seemed to quiet a room. He greeted the security team with a nod before entering the mansion. The moment he stepped inside, something felt different. He could not explain it immediately. The house looked perfect. The lights were warm. Dinner smelled wonderful. Every visible detail suggested everything was exactly as it should be. Yet a strange absence lingered in the air. Adrian removed his gloves and glanced toward the dining room, then toward the kitchen hallway. His eyes seemed to search instinctively for someone. "Where's Naomi?" he asked. The nearest employee hesitated. Adrian noticed instantly. "Where's Naomi?" he repeated. The second time, the question carried more weight. Several staff members exchanged uncertain looks. No one appeared eager to answer. Adrian slowly studied their expressions. Something had happened. He could feel it. Before anyone spoke, Evelyn entered from the living room. "Welcome home," she said. Adrian nodded respectfully. "Mother." Then he asked again, "Where's Naomi?" Evelyn's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "There are more important things to discuss tonight." Adrian did not smile. "Where's Naomi?" Silence answered him. Then his eyes drifted toward a small table near the hallway. Resting neatly upon its polished surface sat a folded black apron and an employee badge. Adrian walked toward them slowly. The closer he came, the heavier the feeling in his chest became. He picked up the badge and read the name printed across. Naomi Carter. The room remained completely silent. Adrian stared at the badge for several long seconds. People do not leave behind the things they use every day unless they have already decided not to come back. And standing there in the center of his perfectly prepared home, Adrian suddenly realized that the one person who had quietly helped make the mansion feel alive was gone. For several long moments, Adrian remained standing beside the table, holding Naomi's employee badge in his hand. The folded apron rested beside it like a quiet farewell. No one in the room seemed willing to speak first. Adrian slowly lifted his eyes and studied the faces around him. Years of experience had taught him how to recognize when people were hiding something. What he saw was not fear. It was discomfort. "I want someone to tell me what happened," he said calmly. The house manager exchanged a glance with the executive chef before finally stepping forward. There was a misunderstanding this afternoon, sir. Adrian's expression remained unchanged. A misunderstanding? The man nodded carefully. Between Mrs. Park and Naomi. The room grew even quieter. Adrian shifted his attention toward his mother. Evelyn stood perfectly composed, yet something in her posture seemed less certain than before. What kind of misunderstanding? Adrian asked. Before anyone else could answer, Evelyn spoke. You are making this more dramatic than it was. Adrian looked at her steadily. Then it should be easy to explain. Several seconds passed. Finally, the house manager cleared his throat. Naomi purchased a gift. Adrian frowned slightly. A gift? Yes, sir. The man gestured toward the kitchen. It is still there. Without another word, Adrian walked toward the kitchen. Several employees followed at a respectful distance. The velvet box remained exactly where Naomi had left it, resting alone on the marble counter beneath the warm lights. Adrian picked it up and carefully opened it. The moment he saw the antique watch inside, something changed in his eyes. He recognized the design immediately. It closely resembled a watch his father had worn for years. Memories surfaced unexpectedly. Family, dinners, conversations in the library, quiet evenings that now belonged to another chapter of his life. Then Adrian noticed a folded piece of paper beneath the watch. He removed it carefully and unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakably Naomi's. Welcome home, Mr. Park. Tomorrow is a day many people may have forgotten, but I have not. Thank you for every kindness you have shown me during the past year. I hope this gift reminds you of someone who will be proud of the man you became. Respectfully, Naomi Carter. Adrian read the letter once. Then again. Tomorrow. The word echoed inside his mind. Suddenly, he remembered. The anniversary of his father's passing. A date he himself had nearly overlooked while traveling. Yet Naomi had remembered. She had remembered when almost everyone else had moved on. She had spent months preparing a gift connected to a memory that was not even hers. Adrian slowly folded the letter and placed it back inside the box. When he finally looked up, his gaze settled on Evelyn. There was no anger in his expression. Somehow that made the moment heavier. Only disappointment, deep and unmistakable. He held the velvet box firmly in one hand and spoke quietly. Pull every security recording from today. The head of security immediately nodded. Adrian looked once more at the letter inside the box. Somewhere between the watch, the words Naomi had written, and the empty place she left behind, he had already begun to understand the truth. She had not walked away because she was offended. She had walked away because someone had made her feel unwelcome in a home where she had offered nothing except loyalty, gratitude, and respect. Less than 30 minutes later, Adrian sat inside the estate's private security room. The space was illuminated by rows of large monitors that cast a soft blue glow across the walls. The velvet box rested beside him on the desk. Naomi's letter remained folded carefully next to it. Around him, members of the security team worked quietly as they gathered footage from throughout the day. Nobody spoke unless necessary. Everyone understood the seriousness of the situation. Adrian watched the first recordings in silence. One screen showed Naomi arranging flowers in the dining room. Another showed her helping the kitchen staff prepare for dinner. A third showed her carrying supplies through the hallway. The footage revealed nothing unusual. She moved through the estate exactly as she always had. Calm, professional, focused on helping others. Then the timeline reached the afternoon. Adrian watched Evelyn enter the mansion. He watched the brief greeting between the two women. Nothing appeared dramatic. Nothing appeared disrespectful. Yet as the hours progressed, subtle details became impossible to ignore. The cameras captured lingering looks, uncomfortable conversations, moments when Naomi seemed increasingly uneasy. Adrian leaned forward slightly. His attention never left the screens. Eventually, the footage from the kitchen appeared. The room became completely silent. Security personnel stopped taking notes. Even the technicians monitoring the recordings seemed reluctant to breathe too loudly. They watched as Evelyn discovered the receipt. They watched as she questioned Naomi. They watched the velvet box being removed from the drawer. Every word was captured clearly through the room's audio system. Adrian listened carefully. He heard Naomi repeatedly remain respectful. He heard her avoid arguments. He heard her attempt to protect the surprise despite growing pressure. Most importantly, he heard what she never said. She never demanded anything. She never crossed professional boundaries. She never acted with selfish intentions. The truth unfolded one sentence at a time. Then came the moment that changed everything. The recording showed Naomi standing alone while assumptions were presented as facts. Adrian's expression remained unreadable, but those who knew him best would have recognized the disappointment behind his calm exterior. Finally, the footage reached the moment when Naomi removed her apron. Nobody in the security room looked away. They watched her fold it neatly. They watched her place down her employee badge. They watched her leave with dignity despite the humiliation she had been forced to endure. No anger, no accusations, no attempt to embarrass anyone in return. Only quiet, self-respect. When the recording ended, silence filled the room. One of the security supervisors shifted uneasily in his chair. Another lowered his eyes. Adrian sat perfectly still. His gaze remained fixed on the frozen image of Naomi walking through the front entrance for the last time. After several moments, he finally spoke. His voice was calm, almost too calm. She was treated unfairly. Nobody disagreed. There was nothing left to debate. The footage had answered every question. Adrian reached for Naomi's letter and looked at it once more. The woman who had remembered his father's anniversary had been judged without evidence. The woman who had quietly cared for his home had been made to feel unwelcome inside it. He slowly stood from his chair. The room followed his movement instinctively. Then Adrian looked toward the darkened monitors and spoke words that settled heavily over everyone present. The person who forgot her place today was not Naomi. And for the first time since returning home, he knew exactly what needed to happen next. After leaving the security room, Adrian walked through the silent mansion alone. The hour had grown late. Most employees had finished their duties and returned to their quarters. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, leaving droplets clinging to the tall windows that overlooked the city. The estate was as beautiful as ever, yet something important felt missing. Every room seemed to remind him of the same person. The flowers in the dining room, the perfectly arranged books in the library, the attention to detail throughout the house. Naomi's presence remained everywhere except where it mattered most. Meanwhile, Evelyn sat alone in the formal living room. For the first time that evening, she looked less like the confident woman who had entered the estate earlier and more like someone wrestling with uncomfortable thoughts. The conversation in the security room had not been loud. Adrian had never raised his voice. Yet the disappointment she saw in her son's eyes continued echoing inside her mind. A few minutes later, Adrian entered the room carrying the velvet box and Naomi's letter. Evelyn immediately recognized both. Neither spoke at first. The grandfather clock near the fireplace marked the passing seconds with a steady rhythm. Finally, Adrian placed the letter on the table between them. "Read it." Evelyn looked at him. Then she carefully unfolded the paper and began reading. The room remained silent. As her eyes moved across Naomi's words, her expression slowly changed. The assumptions she had carried all day began colliding with the truth contained in a few simple sentences. There were no hidden motives, no personal agenda, only gratitude, respect, and remembrance for a day that even members of the family had nearly forgotten. When Evelyn reached the final line, she lowered the letter slowly. For several moments, she stared at the paper without speaking. Adrian remained standing nearby. "She remembered my father," he said quietly. Evelyn looked down again. The realization was impossible to ignore. Naomi had spent months preparing a meaningful gift while expecting nothing in return. Instead of appreciation, she had received suspicion. Instead of trust, she had received judgment. For the first time all evening, Evelyn struggled to find words. "I did not know," she said softly. Adrian nodded. "You never asked." The truth settled heavily over the room. Outside, the clouds were beginning to break apart. Far beyond the city skyline, the first signs of dawn would arrive within a few hours. Evelyn looked toward the large windows before speaking again. Where is she now? Adrian glanced at the head of security, who had quietly entered moments earlier. We found her. Evelyn immediately looked up. You found her? The security chief nodded respectfully. A small hotel near Union Station. Relief crossed Adrian's face, though only briefly. At least Naomi was safe. That mattered. Then the security chief continued. There is something else, sir. Adrian listened. After leaving the estate, she spent several hours at a community center helping distribute donated food. The room fell silent once again. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment. Even after everything that had happened, Naomi had chosen to spend her evening helping strangers. The contrast between assumption and reality could not have been clearer. Adrian picked up the velvet box and slipped it into his coat pocket. Then he looked toward the windows where darkness was slowly giving way to the first traces of morning. Prepare the car, he said. The security chief nodded immediately. Evelyn watched her son carefully. You're going to see her. Adrian looked back at the letter resting on the table. No. He paused briefly. I'm going to give back something that should never have been taken from her. And as the first faint light of dawn appeared beyond the city, everyone in the room understood exactly what he meant. The hotel lobby was quiet when Adrian arrived. Dawn had fully broken over Chicago, and soft golden sunlight streamed through the enormous glass windows overlooking the city streets below. The overnight rain was gone. In its place remained clean sidewalks, bright reflections, and the feeling of a new beginning. Near one of the windows sat Naomi. A small travel bag rested beside her chair. A paper cup of coffee sat untouched on the table in front of her. She looked tired after a long night, yet there was still a calm dignity about her that no difficult moment had managed to erase. For several seconds, Adrian simply stood there, watching, not as an employer searching for an employee, not as a powerful man looking for answers, but as someone finally seeing the full measure of another person's character. Naomi eventually looked up and froze in surprise. Mr. Park. Adrian nodded once. Naomi. Neither spoke immediately. The silence between them felt different from the silence inside the mansion. This one carried understanding instead of tension. Adrian stepped closer and placed the velvet box gently on the table between them. Naomi recognized it instantly. Her eyes widened slightly. You found it. Adrian sat across from her. I read the letter. Naomi lowered her gaze for a moment. I never expected anyone else to see it. Adrian glanced toward the morning sunlight beyond the windows. I'm glad I did. He reached into his coat and removed a second envelope. There is something else. Naomi accepted it carefully. The moment she recognized Evelyn's handwriting, confusion appeared on her face. Slowly, she opened the envelope and began reading. The apology was simple, honest. There were no excuses, no attempts to defend past behavior, only accountability. Evelyn acknowledged her assumptions. She acknowledged the pain they caused. Most importantly, she acknowledged Naomi's character. When Naomi reached the final line, her eyes remained fixed on the page for several moments. She did not need to do this, she said quietly. Adrian shook his head. Yes, she did. Naomi carefully folded the letter and placed it back inside the envelope. Outside, the city continued waking beneath the growing sunlight. People hurried along sidewalks. Cars moved through intersections. Life carried on as normal. Yet inside the small hotel lobby, something important was being restored. Adrian gently pushed the velvet box toward her. The gift belongs with you. Naomi smiled softly and shook her head. No, it belongs with you. Adrian looked at the antique watch inside the box. For a moment, memories of his father returned once again. Then he looked back at Naomi. You remembered something I almost forgot. His voice remained steady. That means more than I can explain. Emotion touched Naomi's expression. Not because of the watch, not because of the apology, because someone had finally understood the intention behind everything she had done. Adrian stood and adjusted his coat. There will always be a place for you at the estate if you want it. Naomi looked surprised. Adrian offered the faintest smile. Not because of your work, because of who you are. The morning sunlight filled the lobby with warmth. Naomi felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The misunderstanding had taken many things from her, but it had not taken her dignity. And now even that dignity had been fully recognized. As Adrian prepared to leave, both understood a simple truth. Respect cannot be purchased. Status cannot create it. Power cannot demand it. True respect is earned through character. And on that quiet Chicago morning, everyone involved finally learned what dignity truly looks like.